Nigeria's Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed said the government has suspended the plan to remove fuel subsidy by the end of the first quarter of 2022. The minister said there is still heightened inflation and that the removal of subsidy would further worsen the situation and impose more difficulties on the citizenry. She stated this at a meeting with the President of the Senate, Senator Ahmad Lawan, at the National Assembly in Abuja.
Stating the fact that, let me start by stating the fact that we did make a provision in the 2022 budget for fuel subsidy for January to June. And that suggests that from July that there will be no subsidy. And this provision was made sequel to the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act that has made a provision that all products will be deregulated. Subsequent to the passage of the Act, we went back and amended the fiscal framework that was submitted to National Assembly to incorporate this demand. But after the budget was passed, and we have had consultations with a number of stakeholders, it became clear that the timing is problematic, that practically there is still heightened inflation, and also removal of subsidy will further worsen the situation, thereby imposing more difficulties on the citizens. And Mr. President clearly does not want to do that. So what we have to do now is to continue with the discussions that we're making in terms of putting in place a number of measures, one of which is the deployment of an alternative to the PMS, which is the CND, and also the rollout of enhanced refining capacity in the country, including the 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery, and also the rehabilitation of the 4 national refineries that have a combined nameplate capacity of 450,000 barrels per day. The increased refining capacity in the country means we will need to import less products. But also, as we're discussing right now within the executive the possibility of amending the budget, we may need to come back to the National Assembly by way of amendment to make additional provision for fuel subsidy from July 2022 going forward, or whatever period is agreed is the right timing. So,
joining us now to look at the benefits of government's action on this matter and possible downsides to it is Muda Yusuf, a former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Yusuf, welcome to the program. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes,
Robin.
well, very quickly, it looks like, it doesn't look like, the fact is that the federal government of Nigeria has backed down on subsidy removal and has jettisoned the Petroleum Industry Act. The explanation that was given in the course of the week is that this is on the basis of security reports and that the president has found it a wise option to act on those security reports. What's your take on the matter? Do you think that those security reports have nothing to do with politics, or this is just about pragmatism, considering the fact that we're heading towards the 2023 general elections, and if the subsidy is removed, then of course that could have implications for the fortunes of the president's party?
Yes, I think we must admit that the government has found itself in a very difficult situation on this matter. Although the minister was talking about the issue of inflation and hardship, of course, these were facts that were known even before the passage of and the signing into law of the Petroleum Industry Act. But principally, just as you said, there are 3 major factors that we can say are responsible for this decision. First is the political factor. The political cost of removing subsidy at this time, just as you said, is something that will be very, very high, and will have very serious implications for the fortunes of the ruling party. So I'm not surprised that, the political forces have weighed in on the whole idea of the subsidy removal and the reform of the petroleum downstream sector. The second factor is the social factor. Socially, things are very difficult for majority of Nigerians, especially from the point of view of the devastating effect that inflation has had in the last 1 or 2 years, the effect that exchange rate depreciation has had in the last 1 or 2 years. This is not just only about the citizens, it's also about businesses. The inflationary pressure has been almost unprecedented. Even though we have an official figure of 15.4% or 15.6% inflation, the last figure we had. If you look at the inflation basket relating to the goods consumed by the average Nigerian, you'll be talking about an inflation of over 50%. And there are all sorts of complaints. The citizens are bitter, they are angry, and therefore there is really no room to accommodate any further shocks in terms of all the subsidy removal issue. The third important point is the issue of trust. Because for a government to call out the citizens for additional sacrifice, you must have earned the trust of the people. Over the last few years, I'm not sure that the government has been able to retain the trust of the people, particularly with respect to inviting the citizens to sacrifice a lot more. Because no matter how we look at it, this will involve some sacrifice. And of course, it is very difficult. So it's very easy to conclude that this is almost an impossible thing to do. But whether it was necessary to now suspend the entire thing for 18 months is a different matter. Because already we have been told by the finance minister that we already have an appropriation for subsidy in the budget, and the subsidy will remain until June. Then the removal will take place from July. Perhaps it would have made a lot more sense to watch what happens up until July, to look at what will happen to domestic refinery, Dangote refinery, and at that point, a decision can now be taken as to whether to go forward or to go back. But what has been done, I don't think is a very good thing in terms of the signaling effect, particularly to investors. Because if there is anything that this deregulation and subsidy problem has caused for this country, and if there is any disservice that the labor union had done to this economy, is the fact that we have deprived the petroleum sector, particularly the downstream sector, of investment over the last 20 years.
But isn't that what the Petroleum Industry Act was meant to address? And now the federal government is saying that this budget that already has a deficit of about 3.9 trillion. Now government is adding onto it another 3 trillion deficit, about 17.5% of the 2020 budget. Now, what are the implications for the Petroleum Industry Act, which was supposed to have been implemented beginning from February 2022, and now it was moved to July 2022, and now from July 2022, the burden has been shifted further?
Yes, you see, my understanding of what has taken place is that the subsidy component of the act was what was being suspended. So the amendment as you go to the National Assembly will be to the effect that the subsidy component, the removal of subsidy component of the act will be suspended till the next 18 months, while the other components of the act will continue to go ahead. That is my understanding. So what has happened is not an entirely, a reversal of the entire act. It's an amendment as far as the subsidy component of the act is concerned. But having said that, this has created a major credibility problem for the entire Petroleum Industry Act. Because the whole idea of the act, apart from removing subsidy, is to be able to instill a lot more confidence in investors, to be able to attract a lot more capital into the oil and gas sector. Unfortunately, we don't have much time because fossil fuel is no longer in vogue. To attract capital into that space is becoming increasingly difficult. And in the midst of all of that, we are not taking action as fast as we are supposed to. We are not inspiring the kind of confidence that we need to inspire in order to bring, investment into that space. So it's going to be, we are going to lose a lot. Secondly, the NNPC has proposed 3 trillion naira as cost of subsidy. That is based on the fact that we are talking about oil at around $80–85 per barrel.
$90 now.
Now it is 90.
It's going up to $100.
It's going to up to 100, exactly. Because you have the issue of the OPEC, you have the issue of the geopolitical issues.
In Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine.
And Ukraine.
And also in the Middle East.
Exactly. All of these things are going to drive up prices up to over $100 or possibly $150. So if you are at that range, how much are we going to budget for subsidy? So we'll be looking at 5 trillion or 6 trillion. How sustainable is that? So if you are not careful, this whole issue can push the economy and the country into bankruptcy. Because that is the reality. Because even to meet up with the 3 trillion, I don't know how that is going to happen. It's going to have a whole lot of implications. We are going to see a high increase in the deficit. We are going to see a spike in the debt and debt service. Already we have a debt service component in the budget of about 3.8 trillion. The last report we had from the minister, we have spent 76% of our revenue was spent on debt service, which is extremely high. So with this scenario, the situation will even be much worse, not only from the fiscal perspective, but also from the macroeconomic perspective. Because the moment you begin to increase your deficit, you increase borrowing, you begin to put pressure on the central bank to finance the deficit, what will happen is that we see a lot more money supply. We are going to see a much higher inflation level, even worse than what we have now. We are likely to see even a further depreciation of the currency. So the macroeconomic effect will likely to even be worse than the impact of the removal of subsidy.
Yeah, but Dr. Yusuf, I read an interview you granted another media platform where you were saying that double pricing is probably the way forward. What do you mean by double pricing? That some people should pay more than others in consuming PMS? And how do you enforce that? How do you ensure that? And double pricing, what do you mean? You want me to pay more and suffer when I'm in Nigeria?
No. You belong to part of the elite.
Which elite?
And those,
I'm an ordinary man like you.
Those who have the capacity.
Okay, you are the elite. I'm an ordinary man.
But the point
struggling journalist.
The point here is that we cannot afford to be subsidizing everybody. And we have to be creative in dealing with this situation. There is practically no aspect of this economy where government is the only supplier of a product, apart from defense and security. Even in those areas, we still see pockets of private sector support. Whether you are looking at education, whether you are looking at health, whether you are looking at broadcasting, whether you are looking at transportation, telecoms, name the sector. The private sector has a window to also play a part. So we cannot be running an economy, particularly for this sector, where the government is practically handing over a blank check on subsidy. That is not sustainable. So the point I'm making there is about market segmentation. It's already even happening in the power sector. Not all locations in this country are paying the same tariff, depending on where you are. And the amount of tariff you pay also determines how much power you get. So perhaps you can replicate that model here. If you have a budget limitation of 500 billion, invite labor, invite the civil society. This is how much the government can afford on this subsidy. How much can it cover? Can we designate some filling stations as a social pricing or subsidy stations where we leave the private sector to take care of the rest? Somebody, the likes of Dangote or $10, they won't go and queue for petrol because it is subsidized. I have quite a number of people like that. They won't go and queue. They have the capacity to pay for petrol at whatever the market price is. So that is what I have in mind. It's a market segmentation thing. You have a dual pricing regime, you have a social pricing window, you have a commercial pricing window, so that you can move ahead with this. Because we cannot afford a blank check for subsidy. It cannot happen unless we want the economy itself to collapse completely. That is why I'm making that proposition. And this can be interrogated, it can be discussed. Other ideas can be put on the table. But certainly, we cannot continue this way to be handing over blank check and saying that all petroleum products consumed will have to be subsidized. Whether it's being consumed by the rich or by the poor, or whether it's being smuggled out, and we continue to subsidize that, this economy will collapse if we continue on that trajectory.
Well, but I thought I saw a story in the papers today where the National Assembly or the federal government is saying, oh, they will not provide money in billions to fix the refineries. And some people have also brought up the argument that, well, fuel subsidy would disappear naturally anyway once the Dangote refinery comes on stream with 650,000 barrels per day. And once the Dangote refinery, which Dangote himself says will be available by September, and that, it will just be a natural, seamless thing, and, you have the domestic supply, and you just buy your fuel. Do you think that the Dangote refinery is the magic wand, or the focus now by the National Assembly and other stakeholders on the refineries will solve the problem?
Well, there is no doubt that scaling up of domestic refining capacity is going to solve part of the problem. But it's not going to lead to the total removal of the subsidy, because we also need to manage expectations. The Dangote refinery is a business concern. It's a commercial business. It's not a charity. It has commitments in terms of debt finance, equity finance, shareholders, and all of that, who are expecting returns on investment. So depending on the terms that the government agrees with Dangote refinery, perhaps, for instance, if the government decides to be selling crude in Naira to Dangote refinery, fine. Dangote refinery can, reciprocate that by also selling at a highly subsidized rate. But don't forget, Dangote refineries is in the free trade zone. Investments in the free trade zone are primarily focused on exports. They are export-oriented. If you are bringing anything from the free trade zone into the domestic economy, you have to pay import duty, because it is regarded as a completely different economy or a different country, as it were. We have to realize that. But if we have to get the Dangote refinery to also be part of this solution, then the government will have to give concession in terms of how much it sells the crude, either in hard currency or in a discounted price, or all of that. Because being in the free trade zone, the Dangote also has the option of exporting the totality of the refined products.
So if he chooses, he may not sell to Nigeria.
If he chooses, if it's a business decision.
The NNPC is an investor in the Dangote refinery.
It's an investor, but the business is not a charity business. It's not a public sector business. It is a business, it's a commercial business. There can be engagement around that. That is why I'm saying that there has to be engagement, there has to be concessions and all of that to make it possible. Because Dangote also has commitments to meet. To those who have invested in it, to those who have lent money to the refinery, and so on and so forth. So that business model has to be properly understood. Then, of course, the government also is investing in its own refineries. We hope that will come on board also very quickly. But going by the history of government management of enterprises, I'm not optimistic that that is also sustainable. Unless we're able to decouple the refinery itself after the rehabilitation, decouple it completely from the bureaucracy and from the political class. That is when we can have something that can be a semblance of a sustainable domestic refining solution.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf, I'm scratching my head now for the next question. Yeah. I want to ask you, do you think that this is victory for organized labor? Because organized labor had a series of meetings. they said, look, if the federal government goes ahead with this removal of subsidy, at any point, they will shut down Nigeria. Is that where the security report is coming from? Is this cowardice on the part of the Buhari administration? The same Buhari administration that came into power criticizing the Jonathan administration over this same issue of removal of subsidy or deregulation of the downstream sector, as it is otherwise called.
Well, you know, even from the beginning of all of this conversation, the body language of the president, and not just the body language, even his utterances, did not quite support the whole idea of subsidy removal. So I'm not surprised that we find ourselves here in this situation. But talking about labor, of course, depending on how we look at it, it is victory for labor, because labor is on the populist side of this entire conversation. They have come to the table with a lot of ideological arguments as to the fact that the state has a responsibility to provide this fuel. They have not reckoned with the very serious economic and investment implications of sustaining this kind of policy regime. So it's a victory, but I must say that this is kicking the can down the road. And the longer we kick it down the road, the more costly it is for the economy and for the people. We have been on this whole strike and things since the days of Oshomole. Imagine if at that time, even though at that time people are also applauding Oshomole, and that has led to total blockade of investment into the downstream sector. If you had deregulated at that time, by now we would have attracted close to $50 billion of investment. Something even much more than we are experiencing in the telecom sector. Imagine what that will have done to this economy in terms of our results, in terms of our exchange rate, in terms of quality jobs, not just anyhow jobs. But this economy has been denied this. And I must say that Labour has done a great disservice to this economy by insisting on this policy position for the past 20 years. Because we are paying a huge price for it. Look at practically all sectors of this economy. Where don't you have very good private sector footprint? We are here in Arise. Arise is doing very well.
Thank you.
This is a private sector initiative. And we have so many stations like that. In broadcasting, in telecoms, in education, in health, in aviation, name it. The private sector has been doing fantastically well. Why would you block the private sector from investing in the petroleum downstream sector? And look at the mess that it has created for us. Look at how much we are spending to import petroleum products. Because Labour is insisting that governments should continue to run and manage refineries, which they don't have the capacity to do. Look at the resources that we have wasted.
Okay.
Look at the opportunity cost.
Well, don't worry, Dr.
We are talking about we don't have roads, we can't fund our schools, we can't fund security, and we are now proposing now to spend 3 trillion. And it's going to go higher than that.
I'm hoping that Joe Ajero will join us shortly on this program, and he will be able to defend the position of Labour. And we also have Professor Patrick Tome, who, you know, as a public intellectual, will look at the various implications. But quickly, do you think that there's a moral challenge here? That President Buhari and his team, they're just trying to save face and postpone the evil day and push it to the next government? Do you share that view? Well,
I wouldn't say a moral challenge, but I would say that they are looking, it's more of a political expediency kind of thing.
No, because they opposed the Jonathan administration, and then it was their turn. They talked about removal of subsidy, and they can summon the will, the courage to do it.
Well, I think what is weighing on them at this time, looking at the movement between the Senate president and the president and all of them, is the political implication and what this will do for the next election. That, I think, for me, is the biggest thing that is weighing on the mind of those who are pushing for this. And of course, we have a lot of parasites who are raking in billions from this subsidy ecosystem. They are smiling to the bank. Some of them are riding jets and all of that. We have those forces also mobilizing this opposition from different obscure angles. Those forces are also there. But what you can see on the surface is that perhaps the timing in terms of the political expediency or political strategy is a very big issue for the administration. So it's like a very hot potato to handle.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, for joining us on This is Live, this Sunday talk show. By the way, you are running another organization now. We keep introducing you as former DG of LCCI. What is the name of this, your new organization?
Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE.
Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE.
It's about promotion of private enterprise,
correct,
advocacy, and things like that.
Yes, well, we wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us.